know the why human trafficking work is needed? To fight for the freedom of modern-day slaves. But love, passion, commitment isn't all you need to be an effective and successful anti-trafficking advocate. Learn the how. I'm Dr. Celia Williamson, Director of the Human Trafficking and Social Justice Institute at the University of Toledo. Welcome to the Emancipation Nation podcast, where I'll provide you with the latest and best methods, policy, and practice discussed by experienced experts in the field so that you can cut through the noise, save time, and be about the work of saving lives. All right, today we're talking to Nora Riggs. She has a master's in social work, about 3.5, almost 4 years experience exclusively working with trafficked victims, sex trafficking, and or women that have been involved and traumatized through prostitution. And so I like to bring real people, real human beings that actually do the work every single day to the audience so that we can learn what they do and how they do it, why they do it. Maybe they could give advice on their best practices. So welcome, Nora.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Yes. And so her name is officially Nora Riggs, but we call her Sniggle Riggs. So. But that's a secret. So nobody knows.
Yep.
So Nora, what exactly do you do? Do you do case management?
Yeah. So our program is called RISE, and it's through the Salvation Army here in Toledo. And primarily our program is pretty intensive and holistic case management, meaning like anything and everything that, a survivor would need assistance with. We pretty much try to meet any and all of those needs, either directly or just through referrals and community resources.
Yeah. So that's basically what case management is. People make it sound a lot more complicated, but it's basically what are your goals and needs? And then we try to do our best to help you achieve those goals and address those needs, correct?
Yep, absolutely.
And so what does a day in the life of a case manager even look like? What do? You get up in the morning and then what?
I pray not. I just, drink some coffee and, no, I'm just kidding. But so I think, a lot of what I thought of as social work and case management kind of got flipped on its head, by the time I started my first day, just because, I liked to think of myself as having a plan, and I would come into work and I'd have my whole schedule for the day. And then 5 minutes into the day, it's different. And it's just, I think I found that when working with people, like life has to be flexible. And so, but for the most part, I'll schedule appointments with clients for one-on-one, so those goals and needs that they might have identified. A lot of times it's sitting down with them and just talking about, what does that look like? What are, let's write those out. Let's get specific. Let's talk about a time frame. So if one of them says, I really want to get back to school. Okay, what kind of school? When do you want to have that completed? What are some options for us to look into? So it's a lot of that sort of one-on-one attention. And then sometimes it's, driving all over town if they have to get a client who needs to get into housing. Sometimes if they get a call that there's an apartment available, it's sort of like you got to go 0 to 60 and get everything done as soon as possible. So then we're driving around town to get, the paperwork and the documentation from like JFS or Social Security and that kind of stuff. So it's a lot of meeting people, wherever they are and wherever they want to be. And I like to tell clients, if you want to sort of kind of walk through the journey and take your time, I'll walk alongside you. And if you want to get in the driver's seat and just pedal to the metal, like, hit the gas, I will sprint right along with you. And, we'll just do everything we can to make sure that if there's barriers, we figure out how to knock those down.
Yeah. So maybe perhaps when you're in school and the social work program, they were like, and then you do this, and then you do an assessment, and then you go to work, and then you have your planned day and you see clients. And then in reality, you go to work and someone's like, there's a possible apartment for me. Can you help me? And then you spend half the day going around town meeting that client's immediate need, correct?
Absolutely. Yep.
And so that's really what it means, meeting clients where they are. And some people can drive their own self to their goals. And some people need somebody walking beside them. Some people need someone walking behind them, sort of pushing them to do it. And so how do you then cut it off? Like at the end of the day, like how do you get a chance to go home, and do you turn your mind off?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think some days are easier than others. So days when it felt like, we got a lot accomplished, or, this client is doing really well, and I can sort of see the hope in those stories. It's easier for me to like turn my phone off because I have a separate work phone. So I can kind of turn it off and walk away like with a smile on my face. And then there's days like today, actually, where I was sitting across from a client who is telling me how she doesn't want to be here anymore and how it's just too much. And, she feels like the world would be better off without her. And it's just moments like that where the reality of, what they've been through kind of sinks in for me. And so thankfully we were able to get her what she needed, and, she's safe and everything. But I think it's just days like that and moments like that where it's the reality of what we're, facing kind of sinks in, and it's harder for me to step away and just sort of break that off. But I think that's why self-care for me, that was something that we talked about in school a bit, but I think I kind of wish I would have heard the message like, this is life or death for you as a social worker. Like if you don't practice self-care and you don't, have healthy community around you, you won't last very long. Because I think it's just easy to get wrapped up in, vicarious trauma and compassion fatigue. Those things are so real. So yeah, I think some days are easier than others, but definitely you need to take care of yourself.
Yes. And so I would imagine you do an assessment, but many people, like even when I was in my undergraduate degree, I remember I would hear assessment and I would be like, assessment. Mm-hmm. And then I remember graduating with a 4-year degree and going out in the world. And I was like, I really don't know what do they exactly mean by assessment?
Yeah.
But do you do assessments, and what's on them?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I agree. I have found that to be true. And it's been interesting because I think, especially when we're looking at survivors of trafficking and exploitation, I think there's maybe even more in-depth questions, down the road to ask. But some of that initial stuff is, asking basic needs. So we'll ask things like, do you have safe housing? Are the people that you live with safe? Are kind of getting some of those questions for me, like as in my specific role, that's important for me as well. Because if they live with the abuser or they live with the trafficker, I have to figure that out. Because when I go to do a home visit, I need to know like who I might run into and what's going to be safe in that way as well. So yeah, but the assessment is kind of covering a wide variety of questions. So we have sort of categories, I guess you could say, by, drug and alcohol history, trauma history, family history, mental health, physical health. So we try and cover it all, but I would say we, if you picture like an iceberg, we try and sort of get the tip of the iceberg, in those first little chunks of time. And then I would say as time goes on, we tend to get more in depth, but we definitely want to have like a pretty thorough overview of what they're coming in with so that we know where to go from there.
Yeah, so you have to have that initial kind of roadmap, but then as you build trust, then you can go deeper and deeper. And some of the things, like if somebody says I'm depressed or whatever, you immediately want to know frequency, like how often are you feeling sad, intensity, sort of how deep, and the duration, how long is this lasting? Because that kind of guides what you might or might not be doing next, right?
Absolutely. Yep. Yeah. And I think that's absolutely true for mental health and for addiction. And I think even honestly with this population, I've learned to also ask some of those types of questions with like being in the life. So, are you still involved with prostitution? Like, is this, how often, and kind of, just a similar train of thought to know, how safe are they on a nightly or daily basis too.
And so what do you mean by vicarious trauma or compassion fatigue? What is that?
Yeah. So when I think of vicarious trauma, I think of like kind of as you're sitting across from somebody and they're sharing, their traumatic experiences, like, the phrase to live vicariously through somebody. So it's this idea that you sort of experience what sort of symptoms of trauma vicariously by hearing about somebody's traumatic experiences. And so especially, I think in any line of social work, but especially I think when it comes to such complex and intense traumas, when you hear that, at least 8 hours a day, 4 to 5 days a week, it can get pretty intense and can start to feel like, you yourself have symptoms of PTSD or trauma or things like that, because your brain starts to sort of associate those stories. And compassion fatigue, meaning, when you are exerting a lot of compassion, it can be exhausting. And so you just start to get a little bit towards burnout, as you feel more and more of those emotions, I guess.
And so when that happens to you, how do you know that's happening to you?
Yeah, well, it was happening actually just about 2 months ago. And I had to have a friend who sat down across from me and we were eating tacos, which is my favorite food. But we were talking and she had actually partnered with our program and came in and did some really cool sessions and programming in a group setting. And so she got to really see me in the setting and in work. And so we had lunch and she said, I want to draw you this picture of what I see. And so she basically drew me a diagram where she saw me going right towards burnout. And it was like a roadmap. And she was able to just point out things like, you seem less present, you seem less yourself, you seem, more distracted in some ways. And I hadn't even necessarily noticed all those things about myself. So I think in some ways, if, people close to us being able to recognize that we're not really, the way that we normally are. But then even within myself, I noticed I just felt sort of just a heaviness as I would get ready to go to work. And I didn't have like my normal, maybe excitement or like feeling of being ready to go. I just was like dreading certain things. So I think all of that for me, just knowing like this isn't my normal self. And then just in general, like a loss of, interest in things and more signs of depression and that kind of stuff can all be linked.
Yes, I remember when I had interviewed, I think around my 12th young teenager that had been trafficked in sex trade. And I remember just going home and going to bed for days because I also think, people who want to help, they think they're stronger, like they have to be superwoman or something like this. No, I can do it. I can do it. Like this is, but they don't realize that if they're not well, then they're not going to be able to do the job. They think they're stronger than the average person. And so when this is happening, I mean, what do you do to sort of engage in self-care?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one thing that was really necessary for me was to be able to reach out and like tell the people closest to me, how to be helpful and how to support me in that. Cause I totally agree. And I felt the same way where I was like, oh, I'm fine. Like I don't need to, take a day off or I don't need to rest because like I can do anything, and I think that can play to our advantage when we're healthy and that kind of Wonder Woman mentality can be powerful. But I agree that in some ways it can be to our detriment when we take that to mean like I'm less important to care for because I'm a worker, versus offering that for others. So I think letting it, like my roommate and some of my closest friends and even my parents, just sort of processing some of these things with them and saying like, hey, can you just check it on me? Like, if you can tell that you see these signs in me, can you just say, hey, let's have dinner or let's go do something fun. And, just to help me kind of get out of my own self. Because I think we're less likely to ask for help in the moment. So like, I got to a healthy place where I was able to say like, look, I'm really not okay, but can you help me to be okay and help me help me kind of feel supported in that process. But I also think, regular counseling or therapy for social workers is so valuable, or supervision. I mean, that kind of stuff where you have a place of support that's just your own, way to cope with things.
Yes, because I'm sure you hear all kinds of experiences that clients have, and then where do you kind of process that? So who do you talk most to?
Probably, I would say like my roommate and like, a couple of my closest friends and then like my sister and parents, because so in our program right now, we are going through some funding challenges and trying to, apply for more and more grants, but I'm the only staff member of the program right now. And so I don't have that sort of colleague, processing space that I used to. And so some of that's connecting with other social workers and, like a case review or obviously like de-identified information, but just saying like, hey, I have this situation, here's this barrier. Do you guys have any suggestions? So like professional connections have been really helpful too, just in those kind of, hey, there's this crazy client situation that I don't know what to do with. What are your thoughts?
So not only are you kind of doing your intensive and comprehensive work with clients, and sort of battling off your own vicarious trauma and keeping a good work-life balance. But then you're not even sure if you have enough funding to continue from year to year. That's pretty stressful.
Yeah, you could say that.
Yeah.
And I think it's hard too, because, I think in that time when I was really feeling the most burnt out, that was another sort of sign to me that I was not doing okay, because I started to have thoughts like, well, heck, if we're not even going to get money and we're going to have to, change the program, or if all these things are going to happen, why invest now? And kind of just scarcity mindset, right? Of, well, there's never going to be enough. We're never going to be able to thrive the way we want to. So I think it can be sort of a hard place to be when there's that uncertainty.
And so what kind of barriers or what are the things that you really dislike about what you're doing? And I'm going to ask you what you like, but what are the things you really think are difficult to do and you'd maybe rather not have to do those?
Yeah, I think I guess so. I don't have a real strong issue with the actual process of grant writing. I think it actually can be pretty cool. And I like to see the process happening and collaboration and that kind of stuff. But I think the feeling of like looking for funding and trying to figure out how to do that in the midst of, sort of the day-to-day work. And yeah, like you said before, just the general stress of not having enough funding is something that I don't enjoy because it feels like one of those things that I always need to be doing, but never have enough time to be doing. So I think that's been a challenge. And I think, and I don't know if this isn't necessarily like a task that I have to do that I don't enjoy, but I've seen more and more in the recent, probably like last year or so, like how very much that systemic like racism and oppression play a role in like literal day-to-day lives of clients, and how systemic injustice can play out. And even just, barriers in the community that aren't necessarily intentional, but yeah, just feeling, like there's clients who are so close to these goals, and then like one thing kind of falls apart and it feels like the world is crashing in on them. So I think in general, just some of that stuff has been really hard.
And so what's that? Give me an example of that.
Yeah. So I think I've seen, even with like housing, luckily there's like the Fair Housing Center and stuff like that. But I think there's been cases where we've had to deal with landlords that are being unjust and people that are supposed to be in places of power that then take advantage of survivors. And, I've had clients say that, we kind of talk about who in the community, is a resource or that kind of stuff. And they'll share on the flip side that, people who were in very high positions of power were the ones that, went out and purchased sex on the street. And so it's just stuff like this where I'm like, okay, but wait, these are like systems that are in place and these people are supposed to be working in these systems, but they're like intentionally breaking them, and just sort of hard to hear that and to process like how that all plays together. And then even in terms of the prison system, and I have a client who was in and out of prison for most of her life, and just seeing the way that that's affected her and her ability to get housing and jobs and, financial aid and all of that kind of stuff. And just how backwards some of that is when her being in prison wasn't her doing in the first place, when it was a trafficking situation. So it's just, you start to see that kind of stuff. And when it's affecting people that you've come to care about and work with, it just is, I think, even harder to process some of it.
Yeah. I always describe it like if you make a mistake, have a bad day, don't have a way to do this or that, it's sort of like you have a softer cushion that you fall on. But sometimes when you're a survivor or you're in poverty, sometimes one mistake, one problem, one issue takes you out. You don't get a second chance. I remember a client had, and you may know this client, got a job, great, wonderful, but got a job sort of downtown and then realized they had to pay for parking and hadn't gotten their first check yet. And so that was an issue that nearly cost them their job because they had to get up so early, get the kids wherever and then park way far away to walk or either try to get the money for parking. I mean, this became a mountain. And I think that's what confuses people is they think that, well, if you stumble a little bit, that's okay. Just pick yourself back up and go on. But for people in poverty or people who had trauma or survivors, they stumble a little bit. That could cost a lot.
Yes. Yep. Absolutely. Yeah. And I've had a similar situation with a client right now where she got an awesome job. But again, kind of back to that systems conversation, like, the way it works is that they have to get, in order to get childcare through, JFS and get assistance in that way, they have to be able to prove that they're either going to be working or that they have a job. But in order to go to their job, they have to have childcare. So it's just like, kind of this cycle of you have to have something in place, but you have to prove that it's in place. But in order to prove that it's in place, you have to do the thing. And she almost lost her job because her kids didn't have a place to go and she doesn't have a support system. So it's just been really challenging to see that kind of stuff play out.
Yeah, that's ridiculous. I think that adds to more vicarious trauma and compassion fatigue. So what do you love about what you do? Because, this is Emancipation Nation. We're trying to get people to become advocates and trafficking advocates. It sounds terrible at this point. So what do you love about what you do?
Yeah, I actually do love this question. So I think when I think of what I love about what I do, I think of the people because, they're the ones that make it what it is. So I'll probably reference a couple examples, but one of my favorite things has been a client I've been working with basically since I started. it was actually about 3 years ago, one of our first, kind of case management appointments. I said, I feel like we're not, we're kind of having a hard time. I mean, in my mind, I was thinking we're having a hard time connecting, in my office in terms of, kind of just doing the paperwork thing, right? Which is important, but I could tell that she was just sort of in a different place. So I said, do you want to go for a walk? And we went down and walked by the docks, which is over on the east side of Toledo. We just went for a walk. And at that point, she didn't have custody of her son yet, but he was, I think, maybe a year old at that point. So he could, just a little guy, but she could do visits with him. And so the foster mom had dropped him off, and she and I took her son and just went for a walk. And, just that process of getting to spend time with her and to see her as a mom. After we had that meeting that day, I talked to her on the way home and I said, so if you could just paint a picture of what your life would look like, in a year or 2 years, what would you do? Like, what would the picture look like? And I'll tell you, she described it to me and she shared it with me. And I kid you not, now here we are a few years later, she's living that picture and she's walking hand in hand with her son, taking him to school every day. She has him full time. She has her own house. She has a job. She's going back to get her GED. And it makes me want to, because the picture that she painted is what her life has become. I mean, it's her doing the work. It's her making the choice every day not to go back on the street and not to go back to crack and not to go back to all these things that she's worked so hard to stay away from. So I think that those moments for me are what make make all the system stuff doable, because I'm like, this is the hope. This is kind of the goal that we're all pushing for as a community. So that has been just super encouraging. And this past April, we had our first RISE graduation. So we had 3 clients who graduated from the program. And even, that whole day really was just such a testament for me of hope and pressing forward, because, they all just got to be celebrated and we just got to honor them for their journey and how far they've come. I think when I think of what I love, I think of those moments and those people and those stories that are so full of hope and so full of triumph and overcoming. And just to know that we get to be part of that and we get to be connected to their story and just be alongside them as they, pursue all of those things. I mean, you can't experience that kind of stuff and not have your own life be changed and that kind of thing. So I've loved that.
Yeah, I remember just going into, so it seems to be around holiday time or something, just going, one time I was going into the store and there was a bell ringer there from Salvation Army. Mm-hmm. And they said, hey, don't you remember me? And then I recognized that this was someone from years ago that I had worked with. And, I just want you to know I'm doing good, or I'm eating in a restaurant and comes up and says, oh my God, I just called my sister because I told her you were here because you worked with her years ago. And she just wants you to know that she's doing well and describe that she's doing. Those are the things that are the best kind of holiday presents that come along all year round. What kind of advice would you give to somebody who wants to eventually do this type of work, even eventually might want to do case management?
Yeah. Well, I think, developing a self-care plan now, so kind of having support systems and having, hobbies or, just things that you enjoy doing for yourself, having that kind of stuff in place and in a normal practice before you really get into the hard work is super helpful, because I think at that, then when you hit the ground running, you're not trying to make up for lost time and you're not trying to sort of, you're not just doggy paddling above water. You can really hit your stride. And then I think too, just for me, in my own journey, I found part of what made my current job possible was being connected to mentors and people who are doing the work and who are in the community. I mean, like you, Celia, just being able to work with you and kind of literally opening doors for me to meet others in the community and to network and just experience, things at conferences and that kind of stuff. That was a game changer. And so I think I would just encourage anybody to just reach out and to get connected and I love, I have 2 interns right now. And that's one of my favorite parts of my job, I think too, is getting to work with interns and just, help them to kind of put stuff into practice. And I was a RISE intern, 4 years ago before I started working. So I think for me, it's such a gift to be able to give back in that way. And that was a huge part of, what landed me in this current job was doing, kind of practicing and getting to know people in the field. So yeah, I think that's the biggest thing for me was networking and having mentors in the field that could help me kind of figure out my next steps.
Yeah. And I think, with the self-care routine, I love that idea. And, to maybe even go after that self-care like you would go after the work you do with clients. Because a lot of times, we schedule in self-care. Oh, yeah, I'm going to do self-care until, all these emergencies, our family needs us, our clients need us, all of these things need us. And so we let that go. We don't protect that time and we don't protect that practice as much as, but if our child or something fell down and skinned their knee or our client had an emergency, we'd be Johnny on the spot. I think protecting that time that you spend on self-care and you spend with your mentor or in your networking that you mentioned, I think all of those things are excellent ways to make sure that you have a good, healthy emotional balance and that you're taking care of yourself.
I love that. Yeah, protecting your time. I think that's super important.
Yeah. And not that I'm always a follower. I don't always do that, but I love to say it. I'm working on it.
Right.
But so what would you advise people to do that, maybe they want to pursue advocacy work directly with victims? But they've never done this before. So what would you say they should do?
Yeah, I think getting involved with a local, like we have the Lucas County Human Trafficking Coalition. So I think getting involved in that or whatever your local, task force or coalition or even sometimes like campuses and universities have, kind of justice oriented groups. But getting connected to something like that in your area is huge because then you literally have a room full of people who either are already doing that work that you want to do, or at least can get you connected to people who are. So, just being involved in that and getting to see what work is being done in your community. And then even, just people who are connected to this podcast, I'm sure are getting to learn about all sorts of, resources and programming and stuff like that in their, given areas. So, even I think just reaching out to some of those programs, like if people call me and say, hey, I want to volunteer or, hey, I want to give a donation or something like, I think it's really encouraging for those of us in the field because then we don't feel like we're, alone or whatever. But yeah, so I think getting involved with your local, anti-trafficking or social justice oriented group and then just kind of putting it out there. Like people don't know what they don't know. So, you don't let people know that you're interested or that you're looking for a networking connection, people won't necessarily know to provide that. But just being able to say, hey, I'm a student or I'm doing this at this point. Can you help me get some information about how I can get involved? And people are really happy to do that usually.
Excellent. And so knowing that there aren't many direct service programs across the U.S. that are flush with cash, what are some of the things that your program, and it's called RISE, and that stands for what?
Recovering Individuals from Sexual Exploitation.
And so what are the things that RISE might need?
Yeah. So one of our biggest needs consistently is hygiene and household items. So a lot of ladies, because obviously for all of us, I think, for the most part, budgets and bills are hard to sort of manage on a day-to-day basis. But like you said before, for clients and survivors, if one thing drops or one thing happens, it can kind of throw off their whole trajectory. So we try to alleviate some of that. We also provide a food pantry and a diaper bank through Salvation Army. So we try and alleviate some of those financial burdens as much as possible, especially while they're kind of getting, started on their journey. So like I said, one of the things that we often need is hygiene products. So like shampoo, conditioner, body wash, feminine products, and then even household items like laundry soap and toilet paper and that kind of thing.
Yeah. And how about checks?
Anytime. Yeah. Yeah. We do enjoy and appreciate any kind of monetary donation if people are able to do that.
Yeah. Excellent. And people that stay at hotels all the time, just take the soaps and the containers and just keep collecting them because you can give those to the RISE program, but you can also give it to programs in your local community.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the thing, right? Is when people are trying to survive day to day and they need some of those basic things, like no matter how big or small it is, they really appreciate and are grateful for, stuff that I take for granted to be able to have on a daily basis. I think, if we can help them to know that they're cared for, even in a little way, is important.
Yes. And then you also have a blog, don't you? What's it called?
Yeah, my blog is called selfcaresocialworker.com.
Excellent. And do you publish on it weekly or how often?
No, I was doing it weekly, and I've gotten a little bit farther away from that just because, as we've been talking, just life sometimes gets in our way and we don't prioritize the things that we want to do. So yeah, I'm not as consistent with it now, but I'm actually, speaking of self-care, doing a yoga teacher training starting in a month, actually. So that's one of my self-care goals that I'd set for the last year or so. And now I'm going to be able to practice yoga both for myself, and then someday I hope to be able to do some trauma-informed yoga to work with survivors in that way too.
That's amazing. So if people want to know more about self-care or trauma-informed yoga, or where to send hygiene product, how do they get in touch with you?
Yeah. So actually the easiest way is probably like social media. My email is actually connected to my Instagram account as well. So my Instagram is self-care social worker, just like the blog. And then on Facebook, you can just find me at Nora Riggs, and then I can connect with people from there. Excellent.
Well, thank you so much, Nora. And thank you for continuing to do what you do. And thank you for taking care of yourself so that you can do this for a much longer time and be fulfilled in doing that. So thank you.
Well, thank you so much for having me. Yeah, this has been awesome. Thank you.
People on the front lines battle for the freedom of others, and they deserve all the credit. They walk alongside victims and help them become survivors and then thrivers. They don't do it for the money, because you don't get wealthy doing a job like this. You don't do it for the praise, because many on the front lines of this work don't get recognized. They don't win awards, and they don't want them. People doing this work are often worried and not sure if their agency or their organization will be around next year, and they shoulder all the pain and the work alongside with their client. They're at risk of vicarious trauma and compassion fatigue. It's a reality for some. So why do they do it? Because there's something much more valuable than money, than prestige, than recognition. When you're involved in helping someone change their life, it's satisfying. And you're not the one doing it. You're the support that is helping, but they are changing their own lives for the better, and you get to be a part of it. There's a saying that a satisfied life is better than a successful life, because our success is measured by others, but our satisfaction is measured by our own soul, our own mind, and our own heart. You know, when I was younger and I was sitting in my classes and learning about the feminist movement and the civil rights movement, I used to think, oh, wow, man, I wish I could have been back there. I wish if I could have marched with Dr. King in the civil rights movement, or if I would have just been happy to lick stamps for the movement and send out correspondence, you know, and I used to fantasize about that. But that time has passed, and I wasn't around. I wasn't old enough to be involved. But now human trafficking that we call modern day slavery, this is the social justice issue of our time. It's a human rights issue. And so when I'm old, I hope we have eradicated human trafficking. I want my grandchildren in the future to come home from school and say, Grandma, I just learned that there used to be modern day slaves in the world. It used to be human trafficking. Did you do anything to help with that? And I want to be able to say, sit down, baby girl, because Grandma has a whole story to tell you about what she did in the struggle to fight for the freedom of others. And I want you to be able to tell those stories when you get older. I want you to contribute all that you have, all that you can, to eradicate human trafficking. And maybe that contribution right now is just listening to this podcast. Maybe it's learning more about human trafficking. Maybe it's writing a letter to your state legislator. Maybe it's educating your nieces and nephews and children and cousins and neighbors and friends and coworkers. Whatever the contribution is, no matter how big or small, you will be involved in the fight for the freedom of others. Let's not just do something, let's do the best thing. If you like this episode of Emancipation Nation, please subscribe, and I'll send you the weekly podcast. Until then, the fight continues.